Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, November 7th, and we are here at the beginning of week 3. And we're going to start out our session like we have in all of our, well, like we did last Tuesday, where we will discuss a bit of peer review from the submissions that we received. Just to show you here on FSO. In week 2 and every week, you have an optional feedback and peer review submission. And this round, we had 3 submissions. So I have 3 YouTube links here for the final 2D platformer composition and game project. And we'll listen to each one of these. We'll talk overall about what we are listening for from this final video capture. We will talk about just an overview of what you've done up to this point, and then we will move on to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments coming up for week 3. So now that you've finished out and wrapped up week 2, you have completed your first full game project, 2D platformer. You have, last week you created did the composition, created the music, you submitted your first round, and you've got feedback and grades on that first pass of the composition. You have the opportunity for peer review, and it's very good. We have more submissions this week than we did in the previous week, and hopefully that will just keep going and encourage more people to get involved, because for each individual we see, and I can give critique and feedback particular to your project, but for everybody else watching the archive, and for you watching other people's project, gives you insight into other approaches to this project, to this game, that things that you may not have even thought of, approaches either good or bad, things to avoid, and certainly things to try out and work on. You get to see me comment on other versions of the compositions, so that you can maybe incorporate some of that stuff that you didn't even try or approach on your pass on it. You get to see other ideas. So, so each week we have the feedback and peer review submission. Let's see. We have 3 of these this week to check out. So let me talk overall about the project up to this point, and talk about what we're listening for in this game capture. So you did the first round of music. We had the opportunity for review and feedback. You had the chance through week 2 to update your composition in any sort of way, especially after getting your individual feedback. Some of them were not necessarily formatted correctly, or somehow a particular intro or loop or ending didn't work or transition correctly. So there was maybe some tweaks that you needed to do with your music. You had the opportunity to actually get it working in the game. Also in week 2, you created all of the sound design, sound effects for the game. You took your wave files from the music and the sound effects, put them and set them up in the game, and then tested everything out. And often it's not until you get the full and final look at everything, not even the final, but the full look at both music and sound effects working together, you can make some judgment calls of how things play back. Do they trigger correctly? Are the sounds playing? Are they playing the correct sounds? Are they playing back in time correctly? If you leave a big gap at the beginning of a file, then there's it basically puts a delay in the sound. And you can have issues with the mix. You can have issues with elements kind of sticking out too far, like music masking sound effects, or the other way around. Your sound effects are too loud and kind of masking and sticking out over the music. So you get this kind of overall view of the project and how it's working together once you get it in game, and you can make some judgment calls, and you might need to go back to logic and fix things and bounce things out. And once you had everything set up correctly and working, you then used QuickTime and the audio virtual cable called Loopback to be able to capture things internally inside of your computer. So you did a video capture, and you answered some questions about your particular composition and your version of the project, and you've completed your first round of a game project. Now, for week 3 and 4, the flow of everything will be generally the same. You'll spend week 3 creating the composition for the project. It is a new game. It is a new game, requires a new style of music, requires a new approach to the music, and how the music is used in the game. And so we'll certainly discuss all of that. New requirements for the music, but the process that we will work on, and the workflow that we will go through, will be very similar to what we did in week 1 and 2. So you'll do this composition in week 3, you'll do the sound design in week 4, you'll get it into the game, test everything out, and then do another video capture of everything. So with the video captures here, the video itself is a great tool to add to your portfolio, to add to a demo reel, add it to your website, distribute the video, show it off, share it around, to be able to show off the work that you've done. So you have the game itself, the Mac application, and the video capture. And the video capture is very positive because it allows you to do stuff and distribute it in ways that you really not as easy on with the game application by itself. This is a working game. It is a Mac application. You can share it. You can put it up on Dropbox. You can post it up on your website. But for lots of different reasons, people might not want to download the game itself and run it. Number one, they don't have a Mac. A lot of the game development side of things is done over on the PC, so they might not even be able to run the Mac application. So having a video representation of everything means anybody and everything who can click on a link on the internet can watch the video. Then a lot of folks don't really want to or trust random applications that they download online. Now, of course, your game application is perfectly harmless, but new people and random people, new clients or maybe future employers don't necessarily know that or trust that. So a lot of very smart people don't just randomly download stuff off of the internet and run them. So the Mac application has its own limitations, and having a video capture of your work working in the game is definitely going to be the best way of showing it off. The other thing is there's no guarantee that the Mac application is going to run in a year or 5 or 10 years from now. I blame that a little bit on the Mac operating system and Apple in general. They certainly like to move things forward and may not allow for legacy applications to work forever. I certainly know that I have applications and Pro Tools sessions and other DAW sessions that I probably couldn't load back up because they're 10 years old or more, being able to recreate something that happened a while ago. But I know I have videos, I have WAV files, and ways to show it off in a kind of captured format. So there's a lot of benefits to having the video captures and having a professional version of that to show off. I typically find that the final version of what we'll see here is often the sum is greater than the individual parts, meaning that while during feedback and review last week where we can go through the actual composition and went through it in detail and discussed every single aspect about just the music by itself, you can certainly find very fine details and flaws with all sorts of things if you're just listening to that version. Instead, when you have the full video, not only do you have the music, but you have the sound effects, you have the animation and all of the visuals, plus you have the gameplay of actually interacting and playing the game itself. So there's a lot of different levels to kind of distract you from individual details. So the full version of things often comes out a bit stronger than if you paid attention to any of the individual layers. All right, we got another updated version here, so I want to make sure we're using that. Close that one out. There we go. What else can I come up with? So lots of things to pay attention to. Another aspect about the video capture itself. I know that it is suggested that the videos be around 60 seconds long. I've found that somewhere between 60 to 90 seconds is probably a little bit better. Certainly nothing longer than 2 minutes to show everything off. I do know, however, that it's kind of a challenge to get all, in this case, all 9 of the audio files to play because you do not ultimately have control of it. You're going to have 7 or 8 of them play no problem, but for some reason the last 1 or 2 of them won't ever trigger, or it takes a while before they come around. So I don't actually count every single WAV file and music cue and sound effect in here to make sure they're all triggered. The content of the video itself is really up to you. What you show off, how you play the game, how you demo it, I leave that up more to you because beyond this class, really this is meant as your demo project to show off your work. It's your version of it. There certainly are, I'm more interested in the process. By this point, this video proves that you've composed the music, you've created all the sound design, you implemented the music into the game, you tested everything out, you made any revisions if necessary, and then you did a final video capture to show off the work. That's the process that is basically demonstrated through this video. We're looking, we want to make sure that it's a clear and professionally captured video, which means it's showing the game, it's captured properly with the audio, making sure that the audio is digitally captured internally and not through the internal microphone of your computer, and that all of the sounds that need to be replaced are replaced. There's nothing from the original game. We're also paying attention to the mix, the overall volume balance between music and sound effects. Another aspect to discuss is typically sound effects are louder than music in a game. In a traditional game, because dialogue is king. In a traditional mix of dialogue, sound effects, and music, dialogue is king because it's telling the story as long as it's the important dialogue. Sound effects give you the information of what's going on, especially during gameplay. It gives the interaction of what's happening in the game. And then music is often there to emotionally inform the player how to feel about everything. So often sound effects are louder in the mix than music. However, you're a music student, this is a music demo, oftentimes you want to show off the music aspect of the soundtrack more than the sound effects. It's really up to you as to which one is more forward in the mix and more of the focus of the video. We just don't want one to completely bury the other in any sort of way. So it's very easy to have the music just blasting through the mix, and you lose a lot of the sound effects, especially the recorded voice. The other thing that happens is sound effects like the gunshot are so persistent that they can often, even at a lower volume, can often mask what the rest of the action. And if they're turned up so that they're like a loud blast, they can very much mask both music and the rest of the sound effects. So you don't want things like the gunshot to bury everything. You don't want the music overall to bury the sound effects. A lot of times the voice, the recorded voice, like you might have pulled a gunshot or an explosion out of the library, but the recorded voice, and that sounds loud and strong, but your recorded voice that you did may not have as strong of a volume overall. So you got to watch out for mismatches in the effects. As long as whatever you're doing with the mix is intentional, then you should be good. And if any changes need to happen, then you need to go back to the file in Logic and adjust the volume and rebounce it out. All right, I think that's a lot of the points to make and things that we will be paying attention to in the video. Most of it is just the kind of the fun final version of everything. So let's start out with the first one here. Oh. All right, good. We got one pass at it. All right, so let me point out a few things. I think that music works. Music seamlessly transitions. Oh, was that my internet? Yeah, probably. Oh, yes. Seamlessly transitions between, music seamlessly transitions between intros, main loops, and endings. I think that the mix between the music and the gunshot, which are the two main things that I'm hearing, is solid, but a lot of the taunts, a lot of the voices are quite low. The jump is a little bit louder overall. That explosion was really loud, but a lot of the other bomb sounds are quite low. So I think it's mostly just volume mix. Let's see what that level is good. So I definitely bring up the voices. I think it's good that you showed 2 passes of gameplay, although you could probably just speed it up and you don't have to play through, just take more damage at some point, or just jump off the end there. What else? I think that, yeah, that's most of it. The music, and I would probably keep the music and the sound effects, music and the gunshot where it is, and bring the other sound effects up to that level. You might need to bring the music and the gunshot down just a little bit to make room for all the other sound effects. But I think those are solid where they are at. Let me go back to that explosion. See where that was. And then, yeah, it's just balancing the other ones. making sure that, here we go. Yeah, so that explosion's really loud compared to the fuse and the pickup sounds. The health pickup was pretty good. So yeah, just matching those up. Overall, the content of the music and the sound effects definitely works. So nice job there. Let's try our next one. That should be good here.
Dodged it. Bloody poor shot. Bring it on. Bloody poor shot.
Cool. Like that effect in the ending. Oh. Played the same one.
Bloody poor shot. Is that your best?
Good mix on the sound effects. There we go.
Bloody poor shot.
Very good. All right, so a good mix between the music and the sound effects. I think everything was coming through quite clearly. I'm hearing the improvements on the music. It sounds like there's more clarity to the mix. I think that's one of the main elements that we discussed last time was how much reverb there was and where the reverb, what instruments the reverb was on, and all of those aspects. So it feels like elements had been kind of pulled out from the reverb and has a bit more attack and articulation to the sounds, which is definitely good. Sound effects work. I think the gunshot, I like the gunshot. It is pretty quick and has a sharp attack. Like, it doesn't stick around for too long. Sometimes we'll get gunshots that are big and have a big boom to them, but they sit around long enough that they create some mud in the mix. I like that the three endings are very identifiable. The intros work well against the main loops, and even in the different combinations. Give the opportunity of a couple of passes of intros and endings. I always find this very interesting, and your video captures this in the graphics in the background. The car here at some point turns into, where'd it go? Yeah, the bus disappears. If I go back here, there's like a little bit. A bus drives in here, right here, and then disappears. And I've never been able to figure out why that is. Probably because I don't do graphics and I don't dabble in that area overall. But I've noticed that it doesn't happen all the time, and it doesn't happen on everybody's projects. But certain things, you'll just see a pair of wheels drive by in the background. What else can I come up with? I like the enemy death sound. Sound painful. Dialogue works. Yeah, the endings get close to the intros. Let me see one of the other ones where they don't overlap, but they get pretty darn close to it. Let's see.
Bring it on. Bloody poor shot.
Pickup sound. Well, that one cuts out in enough time. Let's see. Where's a bomb pickup sound? Here we go.
Bloody poor shot.
Shot that.
Is that your best?
Well, anyway, overall, let's see the ending here. Yep, Yeah, it does. It makes it out in time, so that's definitely good. So overall, nice work. The mix works well. The content of the files work. The endings are unique, so and everything captures well. I'm glad you had told me you had some issues in the actual capture portion of it and making the operating system cooperate. So I'm glad that you finally got a good capture there. And let's try one more.
Bring it on. Take it down.
Whoop. Another screen.
Bring it on. Keep up the good work. Take it down. Bring it on.
Cool. I like the endings. They resolve the music nicely. And also the sound design works well. So first off, I'd say the music might be a little low in the mix. Actually, let me check the intros versus the main loops. I think, yeah, it sounds like maybe it's because nothing else is happening and you're standing there. But the intros seemed, I don't know if it's just louder, but just more present in the mix, more easily identifiable. I'm going to say that could be definitely because there's nothing else going on. But once the rest of the instrumentation comes in, it does seem to duck down just a little bit. And maybe it's some of the instrumentation doesn't have the sharper attack on it, at least in that first cue that we heard. Come on, play again. But the endings are really identifiable. And I think it's probably that lead line that is not as forward in the main loops because we have the strong brass there. So yeah, maybe it's the fact that those are at a higher octave, or so bringing an element out in the main loops so that they compete a little bit better against the intros and endings and the rest of the sound effects. I like the sounds. Your gunshot works out very well. It's another good punchy attack kind of sound. Some of the sound effects are kind of buried in the mix, and some of the vocals. The jump sounded good. Well, jump was good. Bomb drop is good. Explosion is good. Pickup. Pickup could be louder, but the fuse and the explosion are good. Maybe some of the enemy deaths and the ouch sounds. So definitely keep, yeah, that maybe even the bomb fuse could come down a little bit.
Take it down.
But yeah, the taunts are a little bit low. So, it's really, again, it's not the content so much as just some of the elements being like figuring out where the bass line is, which is, I would say, around the gunshot and the intros and endings. bringing the main loops up to, and maybe even changing the lead line of the main loops. Maybe it is just bringing them up an octave so that they're just cut through the mix a bit more, and there's more consistency in the music. And then I would think that at that point the music and the gunshot would be balanced well, that you could then bring up the dialogue accordingly. So yeah, those are some of the things that I can identify. And again, everybody has a chance to just check them out on their own. They are available up on the discussion board on FSO. Good stuff to listen to overall. And again, hopefully it encourages everybody to participate on their own, so that we have even more submissions next week for our Angry Bots composition. And then, yeah, the final video capture we'll take a listen to, or we will have a discussion board open so everybody can check out everybody's final versions of both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. So if you have any questions, please message me. And other than that, we're going to turn it over to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments for week 3. Thank you very much. So now that you have done the first round with our first project, 2D platformer, we will now go into the second 2 weeks and get into our second project. If I go here, there we go. So this is FSO, and here in week 3, you have the new Angry Bots composition with a series of videos that reference the composition in the preparation, recording, and composition of this type of project. A couple of different approaches to help you get started. Then we have a chiptune composition, where, since we're going to talk a bit about, well, we did talk about the history of music and technology and genres of music for games. I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of that with a particular composition here, where the main restriction is using the original limitations of the original Nintendo system. So we discussed that the NES had 5, well, really 4 basic waveform channels, and you're going to compose a composition using those same restrictions. So I'll discuss that here in a bit. And then we have the opportunity to submit next week for peer review. Had a few more people, or different people, submit this round, which is always excellent. We always want to encourage everybody, or as many people as possible, to participate, so we can get a variety of different projects there. And then the rest of we got the class and suggested reading material. So that's what we have in store. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games. using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. The Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where they, not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much, well, number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key. Even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be, sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then WASD work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. Let me go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as as soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on. So we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot, so it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit, and then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient queue is playing until somebody takes damage, and at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health, either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity, going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works, because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick, and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. the battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the Mech Bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall, that might include or probably should include a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So, change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the bass tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas. And then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So, yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue, have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So, all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am, just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. And it's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression, a melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together. And I failed to mention, actually, let me go back to FSO here. I didn't even talk about the fact that none of this is actually due this Sunday. We have spring break next weekend. So I'm sure we're all going to the beach and partying all the time. And no, I'm sure you're at home practicing your scales and your chord progressions and being a good student. Whatever you end up doing on spring break, or maybe just sleeping, whatever. Then you don't actually have your homework due this Sunday. It is due the 23rd, the Sunday after spring break. So also no class next week. We will meet back up in week 4, but that did just the schedule did remind me that we don't have anything due directly this week. So maybe you work on this for a little while, and you also work on our other composition for this week, your chiptune composition. So as I mentioned, we talked a bit about the history of game consoles and different music genres, the technology and the music and the capabilities of games over the different decades. And you're already getting a feel for what it's like to compose for modern games and modern styles. But to give you a sense of where we are at now, we're going to go all the way back to where this began, so you can see what some of the ideas and challenges that they were dealing with then even are still some of the same challenges we deal with today. But you are going to compose in the style of what is commonly known as 8-bit chiptune music, or also sometimes known as Nintendo music, because it sounds very much or very much in the style and limitations of the original Nintendo system. So in our discussion last week, we said that most of the melody and harmony and rhythm of these original Nintendo soundtracks were created with 4 basic waveforms. There was a 5th sample channel that was used, but most of that was also can be used for sound effects. So a lot of the melody and harmony and rhythm was done with these 4 basic channels, and those are 2 pulse wave channels or square waves, 1 triangle channel, which was mostly for bass, and 1 noise channel, that white noise channel, that was for percussion. So provided with this assignment, you get the PDF that kind of outlines everything. But provided with this assignment, you get a logic session that has everything that you need to work on this composition. And so mainly we're concerned with the restrictions, like composing within the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So you only have 4 simultaneous sounds. These 4 channels each have an EXS24 loaded up on them, and in that EXS24 there are sound banks that have sounds and waveforms pulled from the original Nintendo system and the Famicom system, which was the earlier version of the Nintendo in Japan. So you listen through these and you'll probably hear some very, very familiar types of sounds that you can use for your composition. So those sound banks are loaded up across tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you are limited to only 4 tracks at any one time. Now, that means you can have more than 4 tracks, but only 4 ever play at once. So we've easily had people with compositions that are 10s and 20 tracks deep that are just constantly switching between different layers. So, and the original Nintendo could do this. It only could play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between the timbre or the tone of those sounds very, very quickly. So we have those loaded up. So how you use those 4 channels is up to you. Another requirement of this project is you have to have drums, you have to have a melody, and you have to change the sound or the tone of that lead melody at some point in the composition. So you need to have drums, you need to have melody. That means you have 2 channels left. That means you can have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, bass, melody, counter melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody. Just there's all sorts of fun combinations. So what instruments you choose, up to you, with the limitation or with the restriction. You have to have drums, you have to have melody. Then what else? What other? You can change your lead sound. You can have multiple sounds, but only 4 at any one time. When we started this composition, when we started this project, I was kind of worried about the quality of the compositions because the sounds are so bad, quote unquote bad, that that it would end up sounding like I don't know, like Fisher Price music or something. Something really cheesy overall. And I found that compositionally, these are some of the best projects because this, again, since the sounds are so bad, you are kind of focused on using harmony and melody to create more interesting compositions. I think some of the maybe drawbacks of having almost endless choices in your DAW is a lot of people, they spend a lot of time when they're starting to write music just switching between sounds, switching between presets, trying to find a cool and interesting sound. And once they find that sound, then they write a melody around whatever that sound is, versus the other way around, of writing a melody first compositionally and then determining what sound you actually want it to sound like. Well, in this composition, the sounds are so bad that's not really much of the concern. So you're focused so much more on harmony and melody, you end up getting some pretty strong results. So I have a couple of examples here that I want to play, and somewhere. I think this is going to work. I may not have complete volume control, but here, these are all student submissions from this composition. Now, these are some of the best, but this just shows you where this can go overall. Oh, hold on, I don't think I have. I want more volume control. Hold on. Let's try this. Down a little bit. Now. Especially a part like this. So, lots of movement.